8 board members have been found dead at a posh hotel. They had all been there for an annual board meeting, but no one made it out alive, and those responsible made very sure of that. The question is, who could have engineered such a heinous crime, and why? What could have driven anyone to do this? Could it have been an inside job?
Hello there, it's Detective DJ and her team. You've probably heard the description to this episode. It's called Supper at the Seaside, and we hope that you enjoy this episode as much as we enjoy bringing it to you. But before I start, just wanted to introduce you to our team once more. Dr. Shay Harrington, our resident psychologist. Chip Sanderson, my right-hand person and investigator. Dr. Nicholas Gasquet, who is our pathologist. Dr. Ryan Martini, who is our crime scene specialist. And of course, young Alex Kirchhoff, who is our sleuth, our computer sleuth. So without much more ado, let's get into this week's episode, and it's called Supper at the Seaside. It's a midsummer's evening at around 10 p.m. Outside, the waves are rolling gently towards a sandy shore. It's a midsummer's night, very quiet evening. Crickets are singing, birds are already asleep, and pleasure boats are cruising silently further out to sea. It's a very peaceful night, and on 2 acres of very lush, plush, green grounds stands the best Britannica Hotel. No one could have expected what they would have found inside this hotel based on the peaceful background outside. Some of the boats are anchored for the night, while others are just bobbing and weaving in the water. Now, the Best Britannica Hotel has its own private beach, and the top floor has been rented out for a very special occasion. 8 of the suites have been occupied for this night, and there's a very posh dining room overlooking the sea. Very nice. The dining room was very silent when crime scene specialists, headed by our Dr. Ryan Martini, entered. The lights were turned very low, and soft music was playing in the background. Ceiling fans turned noiselessly overhead, and in one corner of the room there was a wet bar. There was a long table covered with a very expensive tablecloth, and there were 8 high-back chairs around the table. 8 corpses sat upright around the table. Morbid, morbid, very morbid. Now, in front of each corpse lay 8 dishes of unfinished peach cobbler, unfinished dessert in varying degrees of unfinishedness, and there were also half-empty cups of coffee. There was no staff in attendance, and that was a scene. Now, according to Dr. Shay Harrington, who always has something to say, always has some reason for trying to figure out what caused this murder and why the murderer chose to do it, where they did it, when they did it, and how they did it, this is what Dr. Shay is thinking. The murderers chose a private setting to commit the deed, and they chose to do it when everyone would be together. And the victim's reasons for having been there was that there was a gathering. Now, let's try and put this thing together, at least try. The motives for this crime, according to our Chip Sanderson, could have been anything from revenge in return for loss of life savings and investments. Chip could be right, could be wrong, he could be somewhere in between, but I'll tell you, our Chip is almost always right. And the characters that Chip has identified for us today are as follows: Matt McFadden, Timothy Shoemaker, and Erin Hennessy, Marianne Litsky. 2 men, 2 women. These are the people that our Chip has identified. Chip goes on to formulate an investigation report for us, and here it is. The 8 bodies found were all well known, or the 8 bodies identified were all well known. they were board members of a very high-profile financial institution. Pete Gardner, Chris Holland, Larry Hestern, Scott Brunner, Brett Danigo, Laura Platz, Janine Redwanski, and I'm still missing one here. Oh yes, and Dorothy Lynn. Each year, this board met at this specific location. It had been a tradition for the past few years for this board to meet at this specific, very high-class, posh hotel. It was a highly publicized meeting, and at this meeting each year, several important company policies were developed. At the conclusion of this meeting, these company policies were usually announced, and a big press conference was held to announce these announcements. There was a big fanfare made as well. So this was a very highly publicized meeting. Now, 3 additional board members were supposed to have attended, and these were Rick Gallagher, who had just had surgery and was supposed to have attended, but he was laid up after his surgery. Keith Soppel was out of the country on company business, and Kathleen Moran, who was off on maternity leave. Now, for the past 2 years, this company had been under investigation because it had run into some well-publicized financial difficulty. Some officials had been accused and were still being accused of embezzlement. Others were being accused of financial wrongdoing. And several investors had lost much, if not all, of their investments. This company was teetering on bankruptcy, and some investment holders had just launched a class action suit. Some of these investors had also openly threatened some of these executives, and others had pulled whatever money they could out of the company. Keith Soppel had deliberately left on company business at this time because he did not want to attend the board meeting. He did not like how the company had been treating its investors, and he had met with the 4 investors who had threatened the executives recently. Mr. Soppel had become suspicious of company wrongdoings of late, and he wanted no part of it. He had also begun to gather proof, but someone had started to blackmail him in turn. Rick Gallagher had scheduled his surgery for this specific time. He had met with 2 of the investors who had made threats, and these were Matt McFadden and Timothy Shoemaker. Mr. Gallagher had become suspicious, and someone in the company had begun to threaten him. He wanted no part of the company's cover-ups, and he had deliberately scheduled his surgery for this time so that he too would miss the board meeting. Kathleen Moran, luckily for her, had been on maternity leave when all this was taking place, and she too had wanted to understand what was going on. She had uncovered some shady dealings, and she had also become fearful for her well-being. Kathleen was getting ready to resign from the board and from the company, but was waiting until her maternity leave was over before she did this. Well, our Chip is busy, and here are the suspects that he has identified. Matt McFadden, because he had lost his life savings and had recently threatened executives openly, and he could not have afforded to pay for his wife's cancer treatment. She, unfortunately, had passed on. Timothy Shoemaker had lost all of his retirement savings, and he had been downsized, and he had been forced to find another less paying job. He had huge debts to pay. Erin Hennessy was a single mom, had to close down her business because she had lost all of her investments with this company, and she had to mortgage her home because she could not afford to send her kids to college. She was forced to borrow heavily to stay afloat. And finally, Marianne Litsky. She had lost all of her investments. Her husband had recently passed on due to an unfortunate car accident, and she had had medical bills to pay for him before he passed on. She also had kids to look after, and she was a single mom who had lost her home due to delinquent mortgage payments. According to Dr. Nicholas Gasquet, the cause of death was as follows. All 8 persons had died of food poisoning. Poison had been placed in their appetizers and desserts. Appetizers were shrimp cocktails and desserts were peach cobbler. Death had been slow and painful, and all deaths took place within the space of half hour. Well, I've looked at all of the reports. I've listened to all of the team here, and here's how I think it was done, for better or worse. The method seemed to be rather simple when considered. Familiarity with hotel procedures helped the murderer to carry it off rather easily. Now, a day before the supper, the hotel had received a call from some unknown person, and the hotel had been told that there was a surprise planned for this particular night, and that the regular staff was to be given the night off. The hotel readily complied because, they wanted to give their regular staff the night off. Why not? And new staff would be brought in to take their place and look after things for this particular night. So the new staff took the regular staff's place, and the food had been carefully prepared. Poison was placed in appetizers and desserts, and the murderer had wanted to make sure that all 8 persons would be dead. Now, some of the guests did not take the shrimp cocktail. Not everybody likes shrimp cocktail, but all 8 took the peach cobbler, and the coffee had been laced with poison for good measure. So the murderer knew exactly what they were doing and took all precautions to make sure that this murder took place. Now, at the entrance of the dining room, guests were asked to leave their cells and different devices behind. And they did comply, most of them did. But one of them had decided to ignore the request and had brought their cell phone into the dining room. But by the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. The new staff had stayed around to make sure that everyone had died. Then they made a call to 911 before disappearing into the night. They had been well paid to do what they did. Now, let me please summarize for you the crime scene and the suspects so that you get a fair idea as to what's going on here. We have a crime scene where 8 bodies sitting upright in 8 chairs around a table with a meal that has been almost completed. That's the crime scene. All 8 people are dead. All are very well-known board members of a very high-profile financial institution, and it appears that they have all been poisoned. Poison has been placed in the shrimp cocktail and has been placed in the peach cobbler, and the peach cobbler are in various states of being finished by the 8 dead guests. So that is the crime scene. The dining room's lights are turned low, there's music in the background, there's nobody around when the police show up. And of course the location is a peaceful dining room overlooking the sea, and it's in a hotel, very high-class hotel. And the occasion was that these 8 people were there for a very well-publicized board meeting. And the reason for this crime appears to be that somebody wanted all 8 of these board members dead. Suspects: Matt McFadden, Timothy Shoemaker, Erin Hennessy, and Marianne Litsky. Now we're going to turn this over to Nick, and he is going to give you some very important questions which you should be thinking about in order to help solve this mystery. So please pay attention to what Nick is going to tell you, and we're going to go from there, and we'll see you after his questions.
Who had the strongest motive? Who could have had enough info to help carry out this crime? Could there have been a conspiracy? Could one of those board members who did not attend be involved?
So, let's look at revelations that I'd like to share with you. The 3 board members who were absent: Rick Gallagher, who had had surgery, Keith Soppel, who was away on company business, and Kathleen Moran, who was off on maternity leave, had all shared their reports with each other. Now, one of them had been absolutely outraged after having heard everything, and they had determined in their minds that they were going to do something to help. And they had chosen the investor who seemed to be the most willing to be a partner in crime. And the board member in question had also been a victim of what was taking place. They had refused to go along with illegal company schemes, and they had been threatened. Very, very terrible. And some of their accounts had even been frozen. So this board member had more than adequate reason, or more than good reason, I should say, for wanting to do something about what was going on. Both parties had agreed, and the board member had provided the relevant info. So who do you think really did it? Could it have been one person acting on their own? Or a board member and an investigator doing it? I think it was a combination of both. Keith Soppel helped Aaron Hennessy to do it. He had the most info to share because he had talked to all four of them, and he had left the country so as not to be around. And Erin had to close down her business because it was a catering business. So she knew quite a bit about food and what to do. And she had the contacts to pull it off. That being that she knew which staff that she would hire to help her out. And Mr. Soppel had the other part of the equation. He knew what procedures would take place at the hotel. So there you have it, folks. This crime was committed by Keith Soppel, Aaron Hennessy. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. And we look forward to seeing you next week. So have a great week, folks, and we will see you again next week. Thank you very much.